शिरोदिनि वासिनि विष्णुविलासिनि जिष्णुनुते भगवति हेशिति कण्ठकुटुम्बिनि भूरि कुटुम्बिनि भूरि कृते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते सुरवरवर्षिणि दुर्धरदर्शिनि दुर्मुखमर्षिनि हर्षरते त्रिभुवनपोषिणि शङ्करतोषिणि किल्बिषमोषिनि घोषरते धनुजनिरोषिनि दितिसुतरोषिनि दुर्मथतोषिनि सिन्धुसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते
Hi guys, thank you for joining the live stream. I hope the audio is coming fine. So Abirjan is saying Dada back in form, thank you. AB is saying please like, share and subscribe. Yes, please do. Kaladin is saying Dada ye time mein koi maza nahi hai. Why wahi ullu wala time mein maza hai where I can fall asleep to your melody. Hi Rohan. So yeah guys, today also it would have been actually more convenient for me if I did it at 12, but you see the cyclone is supposed to come. It might come here, so I'm not sure. So that's why I put up all my premieres for the next 2 days. So if the cyclone does come, and if it does come pretty hard, we don't know when the power will be back and stuff. So that's why I'm doing it at 8 today, and maybe by the time I end it, the cyclone will be here. So let's see. So today, guys, we are going to discuss a 40-page paper by the famous Nicholas B. Dirks, whom people in the non-left today know very well and are kind of a fan of him. His wife is the famous historian from UCLA, Dr. Janki Bakle, who shows repeatedly, proves in her book on Savarkar that Savarkar cannot be called a Mafi Veer. That's an absolutely bullshit accusation and allegation against Savarkar. Now, let's just for a recap, let's go through a basic bio of Nicholas B. Dirks again, and then we'll get into the paper. Why is this page open? Okay. So, Nicholas B. Dirks is an American academic and a former chancellor of University of California, Berkeley. So, UCLA. Dirks is the author of numerous books on South Asian history and culture, primarily concerned with the impact of British colonial rule. In June 2020, Dirks was named president and CEO of the New York Academy of Sciences. Career, California Institute of Technology, University of Michigan. This paper we are going to discuss today is from 1988, okay, when he was in University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Berkeley Chancellorship, academic work, academic background. Thesis paper was called Little Kingdoms of South India, Political Authority and Social Relations in the Southern Tamil countryside. I think this is the paper we discussed. He actually disproves many myths about the casteism or Indian casteism, Indian caste system narrative that's popular in the world, the Dumontian kind of narrative. And he has also shown how, in a way, the British solidified the caste system. Academic work, his department is basically historical anthropology. Institutions: California Institute of Technology, University of Michigan, Columbia University. Notable works: Scandal of Empire. On this is on, what is this on? Okay, British colonial rule. Okay, then let's start the paper now, guys. Namaskar bhai. RS is saying Bangla Pakka folks nowadays targeting your channel. Oh, but apparently he's right wing, and yet he doesn't understand the similarity of killing for your political party and killing for your caste. even though the numbers of killing for your political party is way, 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 way higher than anyone killing for their caste and their honor and stuff in Haryana. But we are better off. Because remember, this is the commie argument. Remember, Abhay, I had told you this story about presidency, graduation, and master's dropout friend of mine, with whom I had discussed this even before becoming a Hindutvadi, that he was a lifelong CPIM supporter. Then he became a Trinamool supporter in 2020-21 to prevent Hindu fascism in West Bengal. So I asked him that, so if CPIM comes to power and 10 Trinamool people die, and or Trinamool comes to power and 10 CPIM people die, but BJP comes to power and maybe there's a riot and maybe 5 Muslim people die, is that somehow way worse off? Is there a hierarchy of riots and hierarchy of political deaths? He said yes. BJP coming to power and 5 Muslims dying for their religion is absolutely way worse off than CPIM coming to power and 10 Trinamool people getting killed, or Trinamool coming to power and 10 CPIM people getting killed. That's the same fucking idiotic, evil ideology that dumbass is operating out of, based on, right? He's saying Haryana is way worse than West Bengal because there are honor killings, even though there are maybe 5 in a year. But we just killed 50 people for one fucking panchayat election, as pointed out by Viking descendant Nicholas Bo Nielsen from Oslo University. And 21 get killed on one day by people fighting amongst themselves for the honor of their own political party. That's way better than Haryana. Idiots. Okay, so the paper is called The Original Caste, Power, History and Hierarchy in South Asia. Nicholas B. Dirks. Paper kahan hai? Yes. See, this was written in a typewriter. Traditionally, power was what was seen, what was shown, and what was manifested, and paradoxically, found the principle of its force in the movement by which it deployed, in which the power was deployed, that force. Okay, in which it deployed that force. Okay, the movement which deployed that force. Those on whom it was exercised could remain in the shade. They received light only from that portion of power that was conceded to them, or from the reflection of it that for a moment they carried. What a beautiful sentence. It's by Foucault from Discipline and Punish. Do I have the book? I think I do. Wait. Order of Things on Suicide, Archaeology of Knowledge, Power and Essential Works. Power. I have the book Power. I don't have Discipline and Punish. I think it's too costly. A very nice sentence. I think it's very correct and very true. Good evening, Avinab. So, the politics of caste. In pre-colonial Hindu India, the king, both as an historical figure and as a trope for the complex political dynamics underlying the Indian social order, was a central ordering factor in the social organization of caste. And this kind of starts with the breaking of the myth, the Dumontian myth, sort of, that Brahmins were the all powerful deep state in India. Everyone listening to just Brahmins, and a state, a society for the Brahmins, of the Brahmins, by the Brahmins. This statement directly opposes the prevailing theories of comparative sociology. And okay, that exactly what we were saying. I have not read this paper, by the way, guys. This is a first time initial reaction, live reaction, sort of a discussion today. This statement directly opposes the prevailing theories of comparative sociology, and in particular, the theoretical position of Louis Dumont in 1980. As is well known, Dumont is the guy who was heavily trolled and destroyed by Irfan Habib as well, in his paper History of Caste in India, which we discussed a few weeks back. As is well known, Dumont holds that the political and economic domains of social life in India are encompassed by the religious, which of course trads agree with. See, this is why trads, Dumos, and casteist trads, Dumo, and commies have this one argument in common, which is that Indian society runs on religion and religion alone, and that caste is distinctively a Hindu and an Indian, or at least a Hindu idea. And it's some people, two of those three groups say it's an evil thing, and the casteist trads say it's a beautiful thing. But in the end, all of them agree that it's distinctly religious in nature and distinctly a Hindu in nature. The religious principle becomes articulated in the in terms of the opposition of purity and impurity. For Dumont or Dumo, the Brahman represents the religious principle inasmuch as the Brahman represents the highest form of purity attainable by Hindus. The king, while important and powerful, represents the political domain and is accordingly inferior to and encompassed by the Brahman, according to the Dumontian, the Kami, the caste strat view. There are, in fact, many textual confirmations of the view that Brahmans and the spiritual authority, Brahma, that they possess are seen as higher both relationally, meaning in terms of the relations Brahmins have with other castes, or the Brahmin Varna has with other castes, other jatis, other Varnas, both relationally and ontologically, than kings. Okay, they possess, uh, uh, they possess and are seen as higher ontologically as well. Now let's get clear about the exact definition of ontology, okay, because these things are very important. So ontology means the branch of metaphysics dealing with the nature of being, a set of concepts and categories in a subject area or domain that shows their properties and the relations between them. um, than kings and the temporal authority, the kshatra, that is theirs. However, these same texts provide evidence as well of what has been called the central conundrum of Indian social ideology by Trotman 1981 and Heasterman in 1978. At times, the king is above the Brahman, as for example in the royal consecration ceremony. At other times, the Brahman appears to be superior to the king, as for example in the Manudharma Shastras and in passages from the Mahabharata. This conundrum is often addressed in terms of the postulation of two levels of truth: a higher level in which the Brahman is clearly the preeminent, the source of everything else, and a lower level in which kings must protect and sponsor Brahmans in order for them to exist as gods on earth. So you see, Brahmin Bhojan, uh, funding the academia. That's the rule of law. That's the nature of the world, nature of humanity. Dumont's resolution of this conundrum extends the notion of higher and lower truths from a classical Indic epistemological contextuality to his well known ontological separation of the religious from the political. The major development of political thought in India, he contends, is the secularization of kingship, that is, the separation of the magico religious nature of kingship, preserved in the form of the royal chaplain in particular, meaning the royal purohit, and in the function of the of Brahmins in the larger polity more generally, from the political aspects of kingship depicted inter alia in the Machiavellian Arthashastra. This is Dumont saying this in 1962. While Dumont is not wrong to insist on radical differences in the ideologies of India and the West, the irony is that the way in which he postulates difference is based on a fundamentally Western ideology in which religion and politics must be separated. So you see, very well pointed out. See, Dumont has become sort of the Jagannath Mondal of modern sociology, I think. कि इरफान हबीब से लेके निकोलस बी डर्क्स तक सब इनको लेके फुटबॉल खेल रहे हैं, मगर कास्ट डिस्कोर्स Indian caste discourse from all sides of the political party, the mainstream narratives on Hinduism, any commie, especially Bengali Brahman Boy caste you find on the streets of Kolkata. You ask them the first thing about Hinduism, they will just parrot the lines first said by Dumont, although debunked by mainstream other mainstream sociologists. So, while Dumont is not wrong to insist on radical differences in the quote unquote ideologies of India and the West, the irony is that the way in which he postulates difference is based on a fundamentally Western ideology in which religion and politics must be separated. Dumont's position in many ways caricatures the Orientalist assumption that India is the spiritual East, devoid of history, untouched by the politics of Oriental despotisms. Now, this is where Amartya Sen comes in. Amartya Sen agrees with Nicholas B. Dirks here that ये क्या है भाई, सिर्फ spirituality है इंडिया का, hard science है वेस्ट का. So when someone concedes and proudly concedes the point that yes, we are good at spirituality, those material aspirations and discoveries वो सब west का है, उनका कोई culture नहीं है, but then As an extension of that very argument, people get to say, therefore, you see, caste is inherently Hindu. Critics of Dumo have often accepted his basic epistemological premises but then reverse them. They take a materialist perspective and view social relations in India in terms of power, pure and simple. Recent work, often by those committed to an ethno-sociological approach to the identification and description of cultural domains in India, has suggested that this separation of religion from politics, like many other dichotomies in Western social science, is inappropriate at the level of ideological or cultural analysis in Indian social thought. What do you all think of this idea, guys? I think it's pretty apt, बिकॉज हमारा तो है कि मतलब इंटरमिंगलिंग है बहुत पॉलिटिक्स का रिलीजन का, विच इज वाई आई मीन ट्रू सेपरेशन ऑफ चर्च एंड स्टेट वाज नेवर रियली द केस. It is in this sense, as also of course in the running critique of Dumo, that the following analysis is ethno-sociological. Are religion and politics separated in the West though? In their laws it is separated, that's why they get to say that, yeah, you see, it's always separately. Honestly speaking, Dada, I don't find any difference between trads and commies except the religious belief part. Yes, and Rohan, their religious belief is also not really different. It's just that their religion is different. Caste trads think they are following Hinduism. Maybe it's a version of Hinduism, and commies, of course, follow the religion called communism. Their chief patron saint and their deity, everything being supreme Brahman, being Karl Marx. Not only is there no fundamental ontological separation of a religious from a political domain, but religious institutions and activities are fundamental features of what we describe here as the political system. Kings derive much of their power from worship and bestow their emblems and privileges in a cultural atmosphere that is permeated by the language and attitudes of worship. Further, temples are key institutions in the formation of social communities. The priests are asking people to not vote for Trump even in 2024. Meanwhile, Nicholas B. Dirks is saying in 1988, further, temples are key institutions in the formation of social communities, even while they reflect structures of power worked out both in and outside their own walls. This is from his own paper in 1987. This is very well said. I think I'm beginning to realize how much Nicholas B. Dirks gets India. In turn, temples present the preeminent position of the king by granting him the highest honor in the temple before even the learned or the Srotriya Brahman. So you see, temples have to be looked upon as the equivalent of the academia of today, of the modern era. Religion does not encompass kingship any more than kingship encompasses religion. There are not two distinct forms of power: secular power had by kings and sacred power had by Brahmins. Kings and Brahmins are both privileged but different forms of divinity in a world in which all beings were, however distantly, generated from the same ontological source. And remember, the source of power of the Brahmin is also asceticism, which the king, of course, does not give a shit about. And power, whether defined as a constellation of cultural conceits or as an analytic concern, power, it cannot be restricted to a single domain of Indian social life. It has to be found everywhere. Dumo has suggested that caste is fundamentally religious, and that and commie trads agree, and that religious principles actualize themselves in the domain of purity and pollution. In my ethno-historical study of a South Indian kingdom in which Kallars were the royal caste and Brahmins were heavily patronized according to scripturally mandated forms of royal gifting activity, I have found that purity and pollution are not the primary relational coordinates which endow hierarchy with its meaning and substance. Nicholas B. Dirks is saying, I have found that purity and pollution are not the primary relational coordinates which endow hierarchy with its meaning and substance. Royal honor, Maryatai Antastu, combined with the notions of restriction, command, and order, Kattupatu, Atikaram, Orunku. Royal honor combined with the notions of restriction, command, and order are the key discursive components which are embedded in and productive of the nature and order of hierarchical relations. Very well said. My analysis will, I hope, do more than simply contest, do more over the issue of which key terms underlie the structural logic of hierarchy in South Asia. Indeed, I wish to reintroduce concerns with power, hegemony, and history into studies of culturally constructed structures of thought. Ah, I wish to reintroduce concerns with power, hegemony, and history into studies of culturally constructed structures of thought. What a brilliant phrase here. This is so important to acknowledge, guys, that this is how it works. Culturally constructed structures of thought, whether structuralist or ethno-sociological. The forms and relations of power in southern India efface our social scientific distinctions of materialistic ethics as opposed to versus culturalistic emics. From even the domain of ritual action and language suggests the complex and conjunctural foundations of hierarchical relations. ये बोल नहीं सकते कि हाँ सबने घर बैठ के मनुस्मृति पढ़ लिया, एकदम मुखस्त कर लिया, अंतस्त कर लिया, हो गया, चलो कल से हम सब सारे एग्जैक्ट ये हायरार्की फॉलो करने लग गए. वैसे नहीं होता है. So there are the complex and conjunctural foundations of hierarchical relations. Brilliant. At least this is true among the colors of Pudukkottai, less affected perhaps than most other groups by colonialism and the demise of the old regime in the 19th century. For the concerns of comparative sociology are not only the products of a 19th century Orientalism. Okay, so for meaning because the concerns of comparative sociology are not only the products of a 19th century Orientalism, but also the colonial intervention that removed the politics from society and created a contradictory form of civil society, with caste, its fundamental institution, in its place. Doesn't it sound similar to today's discourse? Kind of put forward by J. Sai Deepak. That, of course, from J. Sai Deepak, we heard the name Nicholas B. Dirks for the first time anyway. That uh, the Indian state or the constitution seems to be sort of at loggerheads with the rest of the Indian society. Seems to be, at least. He has not come out with his third book, of course, where he will finally conclude whether it's at loggerheads with Indian society completely or not. It was not only convenient to render caste independent of political variables, but necessary to do so in order to rule an immensely complex society by a variety of indirect means. And this is when caste gets solidified. It wasn't solid and rigid forever and after. It becomes solid and rigid. Same names become seem to have the same value all of a sudden everywhere in the country, even though it was supposed to be more territorial and very, very diverse, very, very fragmented. Colonial, and then it becomes a weapon to play caste politics and hate one caste based on hate one group of people based on their birth even more. Colonial sociology represented the 18th century as decadent and all legitimate Indian politics as past. Under colonialism, caste was appropriated and in many respects reinvented by the British. Holy shit. Fuck. Listen to this sentence. Under colonialism, caste was appropriated and in many respects reinvented by the British. However, the British were able to change caste because caste continued to be permeable to political influence. Hey, to. See, this is what Congress and CPIM does. They don't fuck with the dominant castes. Ethno-historical reconstruction is thus important, not only for historians confronting new problems of data and analysis, but for anthropologists who confront in their fieldwork a social system that was decapitated by colonial rule. Next subchapter begins ethno-history of an Indian kingdom. Let me have a bit of coffee and check out the last two comments. So, Rohan is saying Kushal is not a big fan of Nicholas B. Dirks. Now, he comes from a philosophy background. Is it possible that he hates Nicholas B. Dirks just because J. Sai Deepak brought him up, or a group of people after J. Sai Deepak and Miss Indu Vishwanathan started saying using Nicholas B. Dirks to say that casteism has never happened and stuff, although that's not what Nicholas B. Dirks exactly says. Maybe that's why he hates Dirks, and maybe coming from that lens, coming with that presumption after coming across the Twitter feeds of those sorts of people, then he reads Nicholas B. Dirks and then gets pissed off with Nicholas B. Dirks, because otherwise he's disagreeing with everyone from like Doyaboti Roy, Declan Quigley, Irfan Habib. Everyone is wrong. Only Kushal is right and Dumo is right. That can't work, of course, unless he read Nicholas B. Dirks earlier on as well. And even then, I have one defense for him, that he's of course from a RSS BJP family background. He hates casteism with all his guts, of course, and doing groundwork, maybe he has seen the evils of casteism to such an extent that he feels, he thinks that simply hating, criticizing it in a virtue signaling way will make it go away. Now, let me tell you guys a very important sentence said by the famous film director Ritik Ghatak. His character, he acted in a movie called Jukti Tokko Goppo, where he kind of portrayed himself only. It was sort of a fictional biography of himself only. Okay, the things that were happening in his life, he does a movie on that itself. So there, he was going about the forests of Jungle Mahal, Bengal forest side, the places infested by Maoists and the Naxalites. Okay, there, he's just roaming about like a vagabond with one old man and one Bangal girl, young Bangal girl, played by Shauli Mitro, who became a big Trinamool big shot later on. So there, those Naxalites, young Naxalites, okay, like kids in their 18 years old and 19 years old and stuff. So they are having a debate with this old man, Ritik Ghatak. And they also hate Ritik Ghatak for being a Kolkata elite, Bhadralok and stuff. And sort of coming from a communist perspective, of course, that you guys are the rich bourgeoisie and stuff. So, and he goes on quoting this Che Guevara document and that Fidel Castro famous literature, etc. So, Ritik Ghatak asks them, "Have you read Mahabharata?" And they say, "No. What's the point of reading that? But have you read Chair Chithi?" Okay, so different letters written by Che Guevara. Have you read all those famous leftist literature and stuff? There's no point in reading Mahabharata because those are evil texts and stuff. So that's what the Naxalite kid hints at. Ritik Ghatak says, কোনো কিছু নেই বললেই চলে যাবে না, সেটাকে জড়িয়ে ধরে উপড়ে ফেলতে হবে। Okay, that just because you imagine something doesn't exist, it won't go away. You have to embrace it and pull it out of the ground and then throw it away and then uproot it properly like a giant tree. So Kushal's views with in the caste system, I think, is based more on just rants and grievance and not real problem solving. Our goals are of course the same. Our goals, meaning all you viewers, mine, Kushal, our goals are the same. The way in which we will reach there we have disagreements. In my opinion, his views, his way of reaching there does nothing more than to signal to people that yes, he is against casteism. That's all. And that's not a bad position to have, of course, but I don't think it solves real life problems. Okay, so ethnohistory of an Indian kingdom. The Kallars, like the Marwars, settled in mixed economy zones such as Pudukkottai on the borders of the central political and economic regions of the south. In these areas, they quickly attained dominance in late medieval times by exercising rights of protection, patikkaval, over local communities and institutions. The Kallars were successful in this role because their strongly kin and their strongly kin and territory-based social structure and cultural valuation of heroism and honor were highly conducive to the corporate control of the means of violence and coercion. Corporate control, okay? It was no accident that Kallars, like Marwars, were often, when not grant, is this group called Marwars the same as Marwaris? Let me know. It was no accident that Kallars, like Marwars, were often, when not granted rights of protection, the very groups from which others sought protection. हमको प्रोटेक्ट करो, नहीं तो भोसड़ी के तुमको खुद प्रोटेक्शन चाहिए होगा. Oh, genius. No, these are very dark things, of course, but sounds kind of hilarious in hindsight. The Tondaiman dynasty of Kallar kings wrested control over a significant swath of Pudukkottai region in central Tamil Nadu in the last quarter of the 17th century. Whereas Kallars had been branded as thieves in much early Tamil literature and as criminals by the British under the Criminal Tribes Act, In Pudukkottai, a little kingdom that became the only princely state in the Tamil region of southern India, they became the, guess what? The royal caste. Colors controlled much of the land, occupied the greatest number of authoritative positions, particularly as village and locality headmen and as mirasidars. What the hell is this? Miracidars. This is an interesting word I've never heard. I can't even figure out what country this word is from. Mirasidar. Mirasidar in history. In the history of India, a Mirasidar was a hereditary owner of land who was responsible for paying revenue to the state under the Riotuary settlement system. अच्छा, उफ, कितना जानना बाकी है भाई. Mirasidars and ran the most important temples and trustees, I see. These temples were often their lineage, village, or subcaste territorial temples, the Natu temples, in which they received honors only after the king and Brahmins. In short, colors were dominant not only in terms of their numbers, but for economic, political, and ritual reasons. Economic, political, ritual, as well as their population numbers. All these reasons. Pudukkottai, which at its most extensive did not exceed 1,200 square miles, was located in an exclusively rain-fed agricultural zone right in the middle of the Tamil-speaking region of southern India, straddling in the boundary between what had been the two great medieval Tamil kingdoms. Ruled by Color kings, it provides an excellent place to test many of the proposals of Dumont, who, before he shaped the concerns of much contemporary Indian anthropology in his general proposals in this journal and in Homo Hierarchicus. That's the most infamous book in propagating the mainstream view of casteism in India, okay? Portrayed colors in his major ethnographical work in India as a ritually marginal group that exemplified the Dravidian isolation of kinship, not kingship, okay? Kinship from the influence of caste hierarchy. Wow, wow, wow. But in Pudukkottai, less than 100 miles north of where Dumont conducted his fieldwork, colors were kings. They exercised every conceivable kind of dominance. What a genius piece of research, guys. Fuck this. Oh man, this is awesome. Check this out. See how I mean, in every step of the way, Dumont gets trolled by Nicholas Dirks and Irfan Habib. Remember how harshly Habib told him when Habib was giving that speech on caste. He says, after reading Dumont, people will wonder if someone is an expert on caste and they read Dumont, the expert will wonder have they understood anything about caste, because it's so I mean, imaginary, the stuff Dumont says. So here again, a gigantic flaw of Dumont that's being pointed out by Dirks here, that ruled by color kings, it provides an excellent place to test many of the proposals of Dumont, who, before he shaped the concerns of much contemporary Indian anthropology in his general proposals in this journal and in Homo Hierarchicus, he portrayed colors in his major ethnographic work in India as a ritually marginal group, okay, that exemplified the Dravidian isolation of kinship from the influence of caste hierarchy. But सच्चाई क्या है देखो. In Pudukkottai, less than 100 miles north of where Dumont conducted his fieldwork, colors were kings. They exercised every conceivable kind of dominance, and their social organization reflects this fact. Lol. Pudukkottai rose as did other little kingdoms throughout, and this is the idea of little kings, remember? Pudukkottai rose as did other little kingdoms throughout southern India within the context of a late medieval Hindu political order. In both its emergence too and its maintenance of power, it exemplified the social and military vitality of certain productively marginal areas in the 17th and 18th centuries, a period that has commonly been characterized as one of decline and decadence. But the 18th century was not the quote-unquote black century. The decentralization of political forms, neither a condemnation. Okay, so again, Dumont is being proved wrong. The 18th century was not the black century, i.e., the decentralization of political forms. Neither was it a condemnation of the capabilities of the Indian state, nor was it a natural prelude to British colonial rule. The British conquest of the little kings in the south was anything but absent-minded, and there are indications. So ye aise hi ho nahi gaya. It was not a natural, organic way of things happening. Okay, it was not a natural phenomenon, and there are it was not an organic phenomenon. There are indications not only that the economy was buoyant in part because of the active court centers ruled by these little kings. Okay, we know this from Habib's paper as well. Okay, there were economic benefits, economic stability and stuff because of the caste system. Bhai, kya kare? But that's small and local level states were learning the political, military, and administrative lessons that the French and English were learning at the same time. But when the British did, okay, the British did win, and thus their version of the 18th century has collaborated with a subsequent neglect of the 17th and 18th centuries by Western and Indian historians to provide the grist for comparative sociology's Indian mill. What a sharp criticism. Colonialism purposefully preserved many of the forms of the old regime, nowhere more conspicuously than in the indirectly ruled princely states. देखो, कन्वीनियंस अगर कास्ट किसी को देता है तो वो भोसड़ी के कभी कास्टिज्म से नहीं हटेगा. ठीक है, अगर कास्ट पॉलिटिक्स खेल के लोगों को पावर में रहना है तो वो जगह पे ये कास्ट वर्सेस वो कास्ट का युद्ध भी होते रहेगा. But these forms were frozen, and only the appearances of the old regime, without its vitally connected political and social processes, were saved. Colonialism changed things both more and less than has commonly been thought. While introducing new forms of civil society and separating these forms off from the colonial state, colonialism also arrested some of the immediate disruptions of change by preserving many elements of the old regime. But by freezing the wolf in sheep's clothing, holy shit, fuck. While introducing new forms of civil society and separating these forms off from the colonial state, colonialism also arrested some of the immediate disruptions of change by preserving many elements of the old regime. देखो, पूरी तरह से disruption भी भोसड़ी के होने नहीं दिया. But by freezing the wolf in sheep's clothing, it changed things fundamentally. Brilliant deduction. And that's how casteism gets further rigidified and solidified. Okay? What the British do is they freeze the wolf in sheep's clothing. What a brilliant quote from Nicholas B. Dirks. Paradoxically, colonialism seems to have created much of what is now accepted as Indian tradition. Fuck. Holy shit. Did you hear this sentence? Let me put this comment here. Nicholas B. Dirks is saying colonialism seems to have created much of what is now accepted as Indian quote-unquote tradition, including an autonomous caste structure with the Brahman clearly at the head, village-based systems of exchange, isolated ceremonial residues of the old regime state, and fetishistic competition for ritual goods that no longer played a vital role in the political system. पहले क्या था? पहले रिचुअल गुड्स का तो कुछ ना कुछ रियल लाइफ सिग्निफिकेंस था, हर कुछ का कुछ रियल लाइफ इंपॉर्टेंस काम था. वो अचानक एक वो कॉस्प्लेइंग बन जाता है, फैंसी ड्रेस कंपटीशन बन जाता है बिकॉज ऑफ दिस फ्रीजिंग ऑफ द वुल्फ इन शीप्स क्लोथिंग. मैन, see how much dots we can now connect because of this insane paper by Nicholas Dirks. What a brilliant research. Fuck. In my research on Pudukkottai, it took little study of land records to uncover the most surprising historical characteristic of the political system: how little of the land was taxed. According to mid-19th century records, less than 30% of the cultivated land was either taxed, 9%, or given out from year to year on a share basis, 18%, in which 1/9 of the produce was accorded to village servants and 4/9 each to the cultivator and the government. 70% of the cultivated land was inam और टैक्स फ्री, जहां से ये काम जो लोग करते थे उनका सरनेम बन गया इनामदार. ऑफ कोर्स 70% of the cultivated land was inam or tax free. This mid-19th century statistic was, if anything, far higher in the 18th century, when there were at the very least another 5,000 military inams. That is 40% more than the total number of inams in the mid-19th century before the gradual dismantlement of the military system of the state. ये है भाई क्वालिटी रिसर्च. देखो कितना एक्चुअल हार्ड वर्क एंड रिसर्च गया है इसमें, इस एंथ्रोपोलॉजी के काम में, हिस्टोरिकल एंथ्रोपोलॉजी में, और हम आसपास में क्या देखते हैं. ये करने के लिए भोसड़ी के हमको फंड करना है, ये करने के लिए ही फंड किया जाता है. Roughly 30% of the inams, numbers of inam units rather than acreage. So 30% of the inams were for military retainers, their chiefs, and for palace guards and servants. 25% were for village officers, artisans, and servants, and the remaining 45% were for the support of temples, monasteries, rest, and feeding houses for Brahmin priests and pilgrims, and land grants to Brahmin communities. In terms of acreage, roughly 19% of the alienated land was for military retainers at all. 7% for village officers, artisans, and servants, 51% for temples, monasteries, and charities, and 22% for Brahmins. Remember that these statistics reflect a demilitarized political system. ये देखो हमारा जो क्षत्रिय स्पिरिट ले लिया बोलते हैं हमारे नॉन लेफ्ट, ये है वो चीज, ये है उस चीज का स्टार्ट काइंड ऑफ, that these statistics reflect a demilitarized political system, so that both the numbers and percentages had earlier been far higher for military categories. Remember also that this particular kingdom was ruled over by kings of what have been said by most observers to be an unclean caste, inappropriate for Hindu kingship, and therefore inappropriate donors for Sanskritic temples and Brahmins. This structure of privileged landholding reflects, but it's happening under the British. This structure of privileged landholding reflects the structure of political power and sociocultural participation within state and village institutions. The chief landholders were the great Kallar Jagirdars and Kadvaikadars or Charvaikadars. I think Kadvaikadars. The Kallars were collateral relations of the Raja. Jagir estates were created for the two brothers of the Raja after a succession dispute in 1730 severely threatened the stability of the state. These collateral families kept these estates intact until their settlement in the late 19th and early 20th century. The Jagirs were in effect mini kingdoms in their own right, each containing a small court and a full set of inam grants, including military ones. And this is very well portrayed in a way in Kantara, because the movie begins with saying that there was a Raja, there was a king, and then they show the palace is just one small two-story building made of wood. Okay, so I was wondering what is going on. Then later on I realized that this is the idea of the little kings who later begin to be called zamindars and stuff, even in Bengal. But their statehood, their own way of running things was kingly. It was very king-like. So little kings and little kingdoms in which there are again and a simulation of the hierarchies of elsewhere. Importantly, however, the Jagirs were not made up of contiguous villages and were therefore never geographically isolable units. Okay, let me have a sip of coffee and check out some comments now. Abhay saying these people overwhelmingly believe in social engineering through direct government interference rather than libertarian state policies making an impact on the society. And we understand that their intentions are in a good place. They are coming from a good place of heart and stuff. But होगा नहीं उससे. उससे क्या होगा इंटरफेरेंस से? तुम एक ग्रुप को छोड़ के एक और ग्रुप को इंसेंटिवाइज करोगे और स्टेटस में उठाओगे. उससे ज्यादा कुछ नहीं होगा. RS is saying, I never understood his stance on Kushal, I guess, on de-Abrahamization and decolonialism, because in Indian context both are same, yet he supports de-Abrahamization but opposes decolonialism. Yeah, see, in theory he has very two funny arguments against decolonialism and decoloniality, etc. One is that the people who came up with the idea of decoloniality, etc., they are absolute far left commies and he hates commies, therefore it's bad for him even in the Indian context, and which is a very Abrahamic way of thinking, by the way. And the other problem he has with decoloniality again is that casteist trads use in India the idea of decoloniality to defend the caste system. Okay, you see, it wasn't that bad, or it was entirely created by the British, or it doesn't exist, or it never existed. The oppression never existed. So he bases the merits of the argument on the people who use them, or merits of the idea on the people who weaponize those arguments. So kya kare? We are using it in a different way. I think he believes that European Renaissance ideas can be seen as colonial, but those are not Abrahamic. Yeah. So remember this comment, guys. Something said by Nicholas Dirks here, that colonialism seems to have created much of what is now accepted as Indian tradition. लेस टैक्स, कास्ट सिस्टम वाज लिबर्टेरियन. वो ब्रिटिश भी कर रहा था. um, I don't. I think de-Brahmanization is a good word instead of decolonization. But the issue is that they see decoloniality as the same in Indian context as they see in Western context. Also, they mingle it up with decolorization. Yeah, that is the weird thing. Weird conversation I have had with everyone remotely associated with, not remotely, deeply steeped in academia. Okay, people who have done their masters, PhD, highly educated people. With any such people, when I have talked about decoloniality, they have shown me the same concerns that Kushal always rants about, which is that therefore we are talking about bringing back the caste system, throwing out cars and bringing in bullock carts, giving up guns and rifles and getting back to bow and arrow, or the again the trad idea that uh, learning MMA, boxing, Brazilian jiu-jitsu is bad because these are Western propaganda. Learning Kalaripayattu and flying around beautifully in the sky is going to help you defend yourself on the streets on a one-to-one situation without any fucking weapons apparently. So those are the ideas that they think will happen because of decoloniality, whereas the guy who made decoloniality famous has from the very beginning said that we're not talking about that, we're talking about a hybrid, and hybrid is happening anyway. And what a hybrid society will look like, Kushal is in favor of that anyway. That is the weird thing about Kushal's idea on decoloniality. uh, his caste system argument, I'm not convinced. The lens is Marxist lens. नाउ आरएस, अब तो हम मार्क्सिस्ट लेंस को भी ज्यादा गाली नहीं दे सकते, क्योंकि मार्क्सिस्ट इरफान हबीब तो पूरी तरह से अग्री कर रहा है डुमो के साथ, आई मीन हमारे डर्क्स के साथ, है ना. Ryosuke Furui's book. Is there any book on Bengal's caste system and their origin? Okay, Tatvik is saying Ryosuke Furui's book. They explain how Brahmins got systematized in Bengal. And Tatvik, what about Shekhar Bandyopadhyay's book, Caste in Bengal? Okay, let's get back to the paper now. Just below the Jagirdars came the Chadvaikadars or Kadvaikadars, I don't know. All but one of the Kadvaikadars or Sarvaikadars were one of the same subcaste as the Raja, and most had one or more affinal ties with the royal family. So, ये जो family ties, remember how it was defended in the Viking descendant research paper on हमारे अभिषेक बैनर्जी, कि यहाँ पे कास्टिज्म नहीं है, यहाँ पे सिर्फ फैमिली टाइज है. All but one of the Sarvaikaras were of the same subcaste as the Raja, and most had one or more affinal ties with the royal family. The Sarvaikaras were given large grants of land, titles, honors, and emblems. So, guys, we are not even talking about Brahmins at this point. So, what was Dravidianism solving for? What was Periyadism solving for? Each of the Sarvaikaras was awarded a specified number of retainers or Amadakarars to serve them at home, to go to battle with them abroad, and to carry their honors and emblems to ritual occasions in the royal court and in temples. Lesser chiefs called Kudikarars came from Kallar subcastes other than royal one. Lands and privileges throughout the state were also given to other Kallars, called in diminutive form Sarvais or Charvais or Karvais, to keep watch over villages and लोग. कोई भी तमिल नहीं है क्या यहाँ पे भाई? कोई मुझे बताओ ना ये एक्चुअल प्रोनाउंसिएशन क्या है? Survey or survey color, to keep watch over villages and localities not dominated by local colors, that is, all groups other than the Vichenki Nattu colors, who were only finally brought under nominal control in a series of wars in the late 18th century. The surveys were mostly members of the royal subcaste who had no affinal ties with the royal family. कितना डाइवर्सिटी है भाई. The surveys were mostly members of the royal subcaste who had no affinal ties with the royal family. तो blood relation नहीं है, मगर वो same caste में है. The royal family and court was itself protected by Uriyakadars, all of whom were Akampatiers, members of a non-color caste, which was aligned with the colors through membership in a special meta-caste of 3 warrior groups, along with the Marwars called the Mukkulattur. Now, remember what mysterious sociologist and Madam Political Scientist had said in their beginning, in their early days of our live streams, that this is why you can't fucking retrofit uh, jati into varna. Okay, caste का हम अगर discussion कर रहे हैं, that has nothing to do with almost the varna system. We will have to just talk about jati, because some jatis are in different varnas here and in different varnas in other places. These royal protectors, in fact, became a separate subcaste marked off terminologically and affinally from other Akampatiyars in the region by virtue of their connection with and service to the Raja. See, proximity to power, which we discussed yesterday. A number of Udiyakadar chiefs had a prominent role in the kingdom. Like most of the lesser chiefs, these chiefs were given extensive lands but no formal group of military retainers under them. In addition, within each village in the state, headmen were given lands in recognition of their rights to local authority, as well as to render this representative of the state's power at large. These headmen came from the locally dominant castes. Obviously, colors were dominant in the northern and eastern parts of the state. Marwars had a significant presence in the south. Ampalams, which is the title for the headman, literally meaning the central common ground of the village, used by most of the castes in Pudukottai, were also called Mirasidars after the mid 18th century. This new label borrowed from Persian revenue terminology, because remember, anything ending with the letters dar is from Persian heritage. All the surnames like Mujumdar, Talukdar, Wafadar, Rangdari, etc., anything that has to do with dar is because they were employees in the Mughal courts or any Muslim court. Or even in the British court, but the words, terminologies remained after the Islamic kings lost their powers. Even then, they got those dar surnames, Inamdar, etc. So, this new label, borrowed from Persian revenue terminology, was used in an attempt to render local authority as dependent as possible on recognition by the bureaucratic state. Okay, this new label, borrowed from Persian revenue terminology, was used, why? In an attempt to render local authority as if it was dependent as possible on recognition by the bureaucratic state. Nonetheless, well into the 20th century, these local headmen were often as powerful as small kings. Oh, what a surprise! With retinues and legends sufficient to cause their power to be felt over significant areas of the countryside. Sarkar is also a Persian title, I see. Various village officials, artisans, and servants were also given inam, more properly maniam, inam lands by the state called maniam. In addition to this land, each village servant was also rewarded with shares of the village grain heap. Since the 1/9 share of the harvest that was owed to village servants was taken from the grain heap before its division into the rajas and the villagers' share, this classic jajmani payment was borne equally by the village and the raja. Thus, the sets of relations usually characterized as jajmani, that is, as an institution of the village community alone, were sanctioned and underwritten not only by the community but also by the king, both through inams and the share system. So, see, all the movies on caste system, everything we have known about caste system is so fucking simplistic, and we can't really come to any other conclusion except the fact that they simply hated Indian society and Hindu society and wanted an excuse to hate in the Indian society, in the same way as the progressives of the Western world were moving on from their dark Christian past. In the same way, they had to just fucking copy paste that model, and in doing so, in an attempt to do so, they end up simplifying a very, very, very complex system, and then therefore, lo and behold, not solving any of the fucking problems. That is the problem with, I think, even Kushal's way of viewing things. That, okay, you rant, you come across as an anti-caste guy, you'll not solve one fucking problem. Maniam, the term used for many village grants, meant land that was held free of tax, as well as privileged in a more general sense. Maniam derives from the Sanskrit manya, manya, which means honor and privilege. Acha, acha. So manyata hai, wo manya. So it's not maniam, it's manyam. I see. So manyam, the term used for many village grants, meant land that was held free of tax as well as privilege in a more general sense. Manyam derives from the Sanskrit manya, which means honor and privilege. Many of the land grants to Brahmins were called Karvamanyam or Charvamanyam, meaning completely tax free and honorable. Aha, libertarianism. The little hints of smells of libertarianism here and there. However, the term Manyam was not reserved for Brahmins. The term Manyam was not reserved for Brahmins, as British categories which separated religious from non religious grants implied. Indeed, in its most unmarked form, Manyam was sometimes used for inams in general. Manyam was also used in a more market sense, for land grants given to village servants whose task was to maintain and operate irrigational facilities, to village officers or headmen, to the pujaris or priests of small village temples or shrines, and to inamdars, holders of inams, who had such variable responsibilities as blowing the conch for a village festival or tending a flower garden which produced garlands of the village deities. These manyams revealed that royal grants sustained the entire structure of local village ritual. भाई देखो, अब कास्टी स्ट्रैट का एक प्रॉब्लम होगा कि ये दिखा के वो आर्ग्यू करेगा कि देखो कितना ब्यूटीफुल था कास्ट सिस्टम. तो आई थिंक वी कैन आर्ग्यू दैट दिस इज अ वेरी self sustaining sort of a kind of a very interesting juicy model, but then they will say that the atrocities did not happen. No one ever behaved badly with anyone. That's where their idiocy comes in. Even small locality temples were linked to the king through the inam. These local temples organized the ritual systems of villages. How can all these complexities come out of one book called Manusmriti? Even small locality temples were linked to the kingdom through the inam. These local temples organized the ritual systems of villages, of constituting some of its fundamental cultural conditions as well, coordinates as well, which is the demarcated boundaries, centers, the relationships of social groups within the village, defining and internally ranking lineages, subcastes, and castes. Service to the temple was in many respects structurally equivalent to service to the village community, even as most village service inams specified services to both temples and the village, as suggested for Sri Lanka, as well as in the work of Hokart, who saw, I guess Hokart wrote the book How the Brahmins Won. Tatvik, can you confirm? Hokart, who saw each village service group as a priesthood and thus saw caste as an institution that was simultaneously political and religious. Yes. Now, what comes to my mind as a former commie is that when a commie will see these things, even then, reading this paper, he will say that, you see, in every sentence, I'm getting the explanation of how evil Indian society was, because why should there be so much expenditure on the temples or temple priests and stuff? Because they are at the end of the day atheists. So you see, they are making up a version of atheism along with their, and which they are claiming is a critique of casteism, and then therefore coming up to absolutely bullshit solutions, which Irfan Habib is actually not doing. Even though he's I think a more apt ideal commie than everyone else. He's saying the casteism is bad because it led to hierarchies, and hierarchies are bad in general according to any commie. But anyone who recognizes or acknowledges that hierarchies are inevitable, they will then see that yes, casteism is just another way of hierarchy. It benefited some. It devolved into idiocy. It became a cosplay fancy dress competition in some states of India today. But in the end, is it directly tied to one book called Manusmriti? Is it because of just one group of people called Brahmins? Is it distinctly Indian? No, none of that is true. In addition to many inams granted to village and local temples in the form of manyams to local priests and village servants, many inam grants were also made to Brahmins, temples, and charities of various sorts. As is well known, the principal sources for South Indian historiography are epigraphical records of such grants, publicly proclaimed because of the merit which accrued to the donors from them and because of the centrality of these gifts to the ideology of kingship. Hokart was Quigley's guru. Oh, fuck. Bronkhorst wrote How Brahmins Won. Okay. Those are two uncommon surnames. That's why I got confused. As is well known, the principal sources for South Indian historiography are epigraphical records of such grants, publicly proclaimed because of the merit which accrued to the donors from them and because of the centrality of these gifts to the ideology of kingship. One of the fundamental requirements of Indic kingship was that the king be a munificent provider of fertile lands for Brahmins who would study and chant the Vedas, perform sacrifices, and provide ritual services for the king so as to ensure and protect his prosperity and that of his kingdom. Now, this sentence, tell me how is this anything at all different from funding academia, guys? You chill, you research, you stay far removed from society, and say real communism has not been tried, but you get similar grants for pretending to be an ascetic, and coming up with defenses of indefensible things, or occasionally coming up with great ideas. Evil academics and good academics, and hence evil Brahmins and good Brahmins. Okay, this sentence is absolutely, it's not, I can't be accused of anachronism here. Fuck you if you do. This is word for word how modern academia and state relationship operates. Hokatse quickly got his ideas, I see. So see, one of the fundamental requirements of Indic kingship and actually modern democratic governments was that the prime minister, president, or king be a munificent provider of fertile lands, tenure for academics who would study and chant common literature, or perform researches and provide defenses for different government actions for the prime minister or president so as to ensure and protect his prosperity and that of his kingdom, of the country, or the state. For temples, because temples, which were the centers of worship, the universities, which were the centers of learning, and for festivals such as Dashera, the protests, which renewed the sovereignty of the king and regenerated the kingdom, and for Chattirams or Chatrams, also called Choltries, which were feeding, sometimes lodging houses for pilgrims, which provided sustenance and shelter for itinerant Brahmins and pilgrims, the workshops, the seminars, the hostels, the merit or punyam of the king who made the grant could be shared by all those who protected the gift, a duty enjoined upon all subsequent kings. And this is what BJP doesn't understand. This is the inevitability. Actually, BJP has bought into Dumontian view of casteism, I think, even more than commies. In spite of Pudukkotai's marginal social and political position, a very idealistic way of looking at things, I think. In spite of Pudukkotai's marginal social and political position, it was well endowed with temples and Brahmanic institutions precisely because of the prevailing force of royal ideology. Oh. So, Barbarica Smith is saying, so commies hate hierarchies but want China's chairman to be. No, remember, Barbarica, Chiner chowmin, amader chowmin. The underlying political base of any little kingdom in the old regime was its military capacity. This kept no. According to commies and trads, the underlying political base of any little kingdom is the superpowers of Brahmins. This capacity was in turn based on structures of alliance and command, which were articulated by gifts, privileges of varying kinds, meaning proximity to power, and kinship, not kingship, kinship. No little kingdom could survive if it did not have an efficient system of military mobilization. Kshatriyas important to hai, theek hai. These systems were organized around subordinate chieftains, connubial connections, and privileged landholding, rather than a centralized or bureaucratically organized system of revenue collection and military rule. Okay, so it was not a bureaucratically organized central system or revenue collection. Okay, royal grants helped to sustain military organization as well as local village ritual and an impressive, oh my god, royal grants helped to sustain military organization as well as local village ritual and an impressive complex of larger temples and Brahmanic settlements. See how this is word for word similar to what Congress and CPIM does, and BJP doesn't fucking understand. Royal grants help to sustain military organization, ठीक है, अपने अपने गुंडे वुंडे तो है ही, और फिर लोकल विलेज रिचुअल में बार बार छोटे वो मतलब स्ट्रीट प्लेज होंगे, थोड़े बहुत प्रोटेस्ट होंगे about random outside foreign country operation and stuff, Vietnam, etc. To indoctrinate further people, kids, into forever being a fighter against bourgeoisie, etc. And an impressive complex of larger temples, and an impressive complex of larger universities and communist settlements. See, word for word, today's society. The political economy, by which I mean here the institution of kingship, the distribution of authority, and the nature and structure of resource allocation was based on a logic of redistribution that penetrated far and wide. Barbarika is saying problem with the caste system is its complexity. Its complexity was designed for abundance, where asymmetric bets could be taken, but it will implode in times of scarcity, where each community will try to hoard resources, and then because of state incentivization of it, they stick to fancy dress competitions and cosplaying as if you were in the past ancient era. There is no system of caste. Caste is a collection of local status groups in a region organically existing. Yeah, the system is just a colloquial term we unknowingly use these days. There is actually no system. It's a fucking mad chaos that's going on here. The gift of land without onerous burdens of taxation, the occasional participation in wars in which honor and booty could be won, and the organization of land and military rights in relations of ritual clientage to chiefly and kingly patrons resulted not only in a political system of great fluidity and dynamism. Ah, ये जो political system of great fluidity and dynamism है, but one in which individuals could vie for relative distinction in a social system where honor was intimately tied up with rank through interpenetrating forms of political and ritual action, जो कि बंद हो गया because of British. The valued constituents of sovereign authority were differentially and partially shared through the redistributive mechanisms of the gift. In today's context, grants, funding, donations, NGO, charity, service was offered as a way of entering this redistributive system. Holy shit! This has something to do with asceticism, of course, as well. Service was offered as a way of entering this redistributive system. Kinship, not kingship, kinship, a relatively open and inflected system, became the social base and expression of social and political relations. Honor in particular, the emblems and privileges that were given with each grant, itself a privilege, but also the honors in temples that were procured through worship and were ordered in relation to local and royal prerogatives, was both the mediation and the mechanism by and through which relations were established. Thus, I argue that the royal gift was basic to statecraft in all the kingdoms of the old order in southern India. ये बंद कहां हुआ? आज का रॉयल गिफ्ट किसके पास जा रहा है और किसके पास जाना चाहिए? All gifts were not the same. Hashtag not all gifts. But they all shared one thing in common. They were given by the king. The substance of the gift, the land rights, titles, emblems, honors, and privileges of service, unsufruct. What the usufruct? What the fuck is this word? Wait, let me check out Google here. USUFRUCT. Usufruct. The right to enjoy the use and advantages of another's property short of the destruction or waste of its substance. Oh my god. So interesting concept. So the substance of the gift, which could be land rights, titles, emblems, honors, privileges of service, usufruct, and command, was the partial sovereign substance of the king. Participation in the king's sovereignty was not, however, unranked, because the differential nature and contingent character of all these entitlements provided the basis for the creation of a political hierarchy. और कुछ लोगों को लगता है कि credentials important नहीं है, validation important नहीं है to come across as respectable in the eyes of the society. नहीं होगा उससे. Ultimately, entitlements by their very nature, constituted hierarchy through a logic of variable proximity to the king, to sovereignty itself. What Geertz has written about Bali is true of the old order in South India, Bali, the Hindu majority area. The whole of the Negara, court life, the traditions that organized it, the extraditions that supported it, the privileges that accompanied it, was essentially directed toward defining what power was, and what power was what kings were. Now, did you see a certain reel that got viral on Instagram a few months from today, 2-3 months back? A South Indian man went to a Hindu temple in Bali and was creating a ruckus, creating an absolute fucking scene, and shouting at the top of his voice with the priest there in Bali, because the priest said that there are some portions of the temple you can't enter or touch and something. तो उसका उसका दिमाग पूरा हिल गया. He starts saying that I know everything about Hinduism, Sanatan Dharma, I come from this family and this background, etc. How dare you try to explain to me? भाई अंकल को समझ में नहीं आया कि वो बाली है. बाली में तो ब्रिटिश वे ऑफ एंड ब्रिटिश एंड पोस्ट इंडिपेंडेंस वे ऑफ इंसेंटिवाइजिंग ऑफ कास्ट नहीं होता है. तो एक कास्ट का हर वैल्यू हर जगह में सॉलिड एंड रिजिड फॉर एवर एंड आफ्टर वैसा नहीं बन गया है. तो व्हाट्स ट्रू फॉर इंडिया इज नॉट ट्रू फॉर बाली. So no matter what caste you are from, you are not going to be considered a person who is able to get to any portion of the temple in Bali. Okay, Bali still operates like some villages of India in that sense, or the pre-independence or pre-colonial India in that sense. That yes, your caste is significant only because of the territory that caste hails from, not every fucking where. Interesting part is all the grants were assets and not consumables like cash. Right, even more fascinating and actually brilliant, because that would have created so much inflation. No, that's the way to do it. In that is for that I actually really like what Narendra Modi did after Corona. Instead of giving stimulus packages which would create inflation, which was recommended by everyone from a sort of a libertarian Subramanian Swami, free market Subramanian Swami, to developmental economist Abhijit Banerjee, that give print more money and give it to people as a stimulus. But Narendra Modi gave out assets, rice and stuff. So my sense of the meaning of royal gifts was initially based not only on a reading of land records, which though they gave histories of grants, revealed a thick infrastructure of gifting. Thick infrastructure of gifting. And suggested that land rights were necessarily conjoined with other rights to privilege, service, and honor, were themselves insufficiently explicit about the ideological content of the system to permit a full or satisfactory interpretation. Rather, I developed an understanding of kingly beneficence from textual sources that depicted the centrality of gifts and their various forms, using 18th century texts, genealogies, chronologies, and ballads and stuff as cultural discourses. Very well said. Our genealogies, chronicles, ballads are cultural discourses. I found persistent motifs, events, narrative forms, tropes, images, and I read the parts they played in the poetics of power. Beautiful. I used this textualized discourse not only, or at first I thought was all I could do, to get a sense of how these Indians conceived their own past, but also to demarcate the key elements of my subsequent inquiry to create an historiographical frame for understanding key structures, events, and their relations. And I found that my textualized readings were indeed realized in historical processes. Thus, I was able to identify and focus on the core conceptions of sovereignty, the interpenetrating transactions in gifts, service, and kinship, not kingship. So I was able to identify and focus on the core conceptions of sovereignty, the interpenetrating transactions in gifts, service, and kinship, the structure and form of political hegemony. I was able to understand, तो इससे अलावा क्या होता है? How is this anything different from what happens today? It's only the names, terminologies, lexicons have changed. Nothing has changed. I was able to understand what had previously been obscured in the colonial writing on the little kings or polygars. So the little king term returns, okay? That's a very important term. Or polygars, that the adoption of Hindu forms of kingship by what were said to be low caste, later often defined as criminal caste under British rule, low caste chiefs, was not just an ideological ruse, but was rather reflected in the entire structure of the political system. That rights to landholding were political rights and reflected the structure of the little kingdom, at the same time that they revealed the pervasive importance of royal honor, and that the states were not absolute failures because of their lack of emphasis on the bureaucratic demarcation of land rights and the collection of revenue, but rather successful, vital, and to the British highly threatening political systems because of the interplay of rights and privileges to land, service, kinship, honor, and local resources. This is the reality of caste, guys. This is how complex it is. This is how fucking much you need to read and research, and how skilled you have to be at articulating these things. ये है नहीं है, अच्छा था बुरा था, इस चुतिया पे से कास्ट को हम नहीं समझ पाएंगे और सॉल्व भी नहीं कर पाएंगे, कास्टिज्म को, कास्ट बेस्ड बैड बिहेवियर को. द कल्चरल पोएटिक्स ऑफ पावर. But I was still not altogether clear if so, how. See, this is how a critical thinking mind works. He's wondering, he's on sort of a adventure, an intellectual adventure, a sort of an intellectual treasure hunt. He's thinking, stumbling upon evidence, moving on, learning new things, changing his views. That this is इसको चुतिए बोलते हैं liberal art education. इसके लिए फंड किया जाता है research. So I was still not altogether clear if so, how a logic of variable proximity to the king, proximity to the king, actually informed social relations in the little kingdom. Now, compare this to whatever we are going to read from here onwards. Just replace the words kingdom with Kolkata and any caste with the Bhadralok caste, meaning the Brahman Boidyo castes of Kolkata, because of their proximity to the kingdom, okay? It was this, in a general sense, that was the subject of a subsequent year's ethnographic research. It was only in my fieldwork that I was able to find that the forms of clan and caste structure that the British had seen as organic growths from the Indian soil had in fact been vitally transformed by the political histories of local level chiefs. First, through inquiries conducted in the field, I determined that the political hierarchy was also, with certain crucial exceptions, a social hierarchy. As I mentioned above, the Jagirdars were collateral chiefs, the Charvaikars affinally connected warriors, the Kurikars mostly colours but from subcastes other than the royal subcaste, and so on down the line. The colours themselves were, as Dumo also found for the Pramalai color, territorially segmented, but in Pudukkottai, the royal subcaste occupied a uniquely important position, dominating all the other segments or subcastes. The internal organization of the royal subcaste, markedly different than all other subcastes, itself reflected a systematic, if sometimes paradoxical, inflection by political forces. And the settlement of colour chiefs, both great and small, throughout areas of non-colour settlement, as well as in the area inhabited by a large and often unruly colour subcaste, affected, so meaning led to, both the ideological and instrumental dominance of royalty. Ideological dominance of royalty, as well as the instrumental, the real life hard dominance of royalty. These colours often had royal retainers under them, privileged rights to local lands, and the right to receive first honours on behalf of the Pudukkottai Raja in all village and locality temples and festivals. All this is being said about whom? Colours, okay? Who, according to British or Dumo, were a marginal subcaste, sort of a lower caste, sad people. The hierarchical force of royalty was expressed in many ways, not least through the comments of one of my principal informants, the titular head of the royal clan or Kuppam. Quote, when we assume our royal status, Antastu, this man told me, we became as it were a royal family. Hence, we, the 5 top lineages of the clan, began to have affinal relations only with royal families. So we became more elevated and dignified than the other groups and other clans. While the influence and glory of the Raja was high, the influence of those of us living in our group also went up accordingly. Others who do not have, तो इसके साथ मनुस्मृति का क्या संपर्क? Others who do not have marriage ties with the 5 chief lineages also reside here, but we classify them at a lower level. So you can live in Kolkata, but if you're not a commie, if you don't have the consumption patterns of the Bhadralok, ... All members of the royal subcaste were loosely called Rajapantu, meaning that they had a connection with the Raja. While this term was used to designate all members of the subcaste in an unmarked sense, within the subcaste itself there were multiple distinctions of rank, all of them, as it turned out, having to do with proximity of the king. In one particularly lucid discussion, my informant explained to me the logic of hierarchy in Pudukkottai. Quote, why are we, meaning the colours, superior? He asked rhetorically. Because we maintain control and order in the Kattupatu, or order meaning Kattupatu. We maintain control and order in our community. So for Bhadraloks, we don't let Hindu fascists take over. We do not allow widow remarriage, and we abide by the moral codes of our society strictly. You see, we don't let Bohiragatos take over our politics, and we make sure that our honor killings happen only because of political parties and not because of caste. Other colors may say that all colors are the same, but so you see, other Brahmins may say all Brahmins are the same, but we Kolkata's Bhadrlok are different. It is popularly assumed that all colors are thieves, but we are not thieves. How can the ruling colors steal from others? Our colors are pillars of the community, chiefs, village leaders, politicians, and nobles. We have to maintain law and order. How can we go off thieving? We deceived. Uh, we decided that we should lead a life of order and restriction. Restriction, okay? Restriction means asceticism. Asceticism. Others are not like us. We others are not like us. ये देखो, आज मैंने ये लाइव स्ट्रीम शुरू करने से पहले ही जो पोस्ट किया कम्युनिटी टैब में, वो ही है ये सेंटेंस, अदर्स आर नॉट लाइक अस. दिस इज द रूट ऑफ कास्टिज्म. दिस इज द रूट ऑफ स्टैटिसिज्म, which is inevitable, which is still evil, bad, must not be done, but happens everywhere in the world, in every society, no matter what the economics of the society. Okay, others are not like us. The people who die in Morichapi are not like us. We care about people in Vietnam. We people care about people in Cuba, but we don't have to care about people in Morichapi. Others are not like us. Haryanvis are not like us because they kill 5 people in a year for their caste, but we are better off because we kill 50 people for our political party in one election. We live for honor and status. Status bhi bol diya. Arey, where is Max Weber? Oh my god. We live for honor and status. Our colors based our lives on the temple and on marriage relations. Only if the temple and the lineage are correct can we seek an alliance. You have to be from a proper university, and you have to have proper views on bourgeoisie. Our honor is displayed in the palace and in temples. When honor is measured in the same way the number of carats is measured in gold, will we like less dignified groups taking seats on a par with us? No, they are not fit to sit with us. The preeminence of the royal subcaste is thus explained not only through reference to the fact that the preeminence of the royal subcaste is thus explained not only through reference to the fact that the king hailed from this subcaste, but by noting that this subcaste was the most rigidly defined and maintained code for conduct of all subcastes. These colors have the most order, and they enforced order through the set of restrictions which are implied by the term kattupatu. And how do you maintain order in Bengal, in Bhadralok society? You don't listen to Bhojpuri music. You say folk music and baul music is great, even if you don't like it, even if you dance to Chikni Chameli after 2 shots of vodka. Kattupatu, which can be taken to mean code for conduct and discipline, literally means something more like restriction or even constriction, deriving from the root kattu, meaning tied or knotted. So, jallikattu. The code for conduct includes rigidly defined kinship rules, some of which, like the Brahmanic prohibition of widow remarriage, mark the royal colors off from all other colors and suggest a kind of Sanskritization, others of which involve working one's way through the myriad gradations of upper color society by trading political, social, and cultural capital back and forth, often through affinal family ties, affinal transactions. So you see, being communist pays off in this context. Kattupattu is a term that is used frequently by all color subcastes and indeed all Pudukottai castes, though only among colors and specifically within the royal subcaste of colors does it have the particular kind of inflection I just described. For all these groups, though again most importantly for the royal subcaste, Kattupatu does not mean simply a code for conduct, but a set of authoritative procedures which renders this code enforceable within the community. Remember what Pierre Bourdieu says about habitation and how a habitus is created for a status group. Basically, it's about your consumption patterns and how you consume a certain sport and what sport you consume. What food do you eat? How do you eat it? Okay, what movies do you watch? How do you watch it? Now, since Nina joined late, let me point out something insane Nicholas B. Dirks said here, okay? Since Nina is probably not watching from the very beginning. Check out this comment, Niner. Okay, this is a quote from this paper earlier on, so do check it out later on from the beginning. My informants' statements and the general ideological orientation they reflect reveal the continuation of concerns about the past reputation of colors as thieves, bandits, outlaws. Okay, so even the Bhadraloks are concerned about their past reputation of being upper caste oppressors. The ethnographic discourse here, now we are not like them. The ethnographic discourse here shares much in common with the 18th century family histories that I mentioned earlier. In these texts, as in the statements of color informants, the acknowledged past becomes totally transformed by the attainment of kingship. Ah, in these texts, as in the statements of color informants, the acknowledged past becomes totally transformed by how? By the attainment of kingship. Again, there is an implicit opposition between the representation of the activities of thieves and the activities of kings. So we are not Brahmin oppressors anymore. We are your people. We are the subaltern. We are the fighters for subaltern people. We are the people who fight the bourgeoisie. We are not like our evil oppressor ancestors. We hate Hinduism just like you should as a lower caste person. You see? That's exactly what's going on here. In this case, the royal duty of protecting and subduing disorder is combined. What a brilliant sentence. The royal duty of protecting and subduing disorder is combined with an ideology of order and restriction, which organizes and becomes the subtext of social relations of the subcaste. This is fucking how exactly to describe West Bengal's caste system. The very word color means thief in Tamil. And no one, at least none of my informants, disputes the fact that at certain places and times, particular groups of colors engaged in predatory activity, just like no Bhadralok would, let's say, dispute the claim or argument or even fact that upper castes were oppressive towards lower castes. In fact, they constantly bring it up with a certain kind of relish, suggesting only partial embarrassment about their past. See, and as I and others have written elsewhere, this in itself is not necessarily a problem in any case, since predation was often the principal means used to accumulate wealth by kings who were not so concerned about a regularized tax base as the British became when they began in the early 19th century to gain most of their profit from land revenue. See, जितना भी libertarianism था भोसरी के वो ब्रिटिश ने गाड़ मार दिया. In Pudukkottai, colors attained their position of royal authority in the first place by providing protection to local communities and institutions by defending CPIM. And this is amply documented in inscriptions recording protection contracts from the 14th century on. Indeed, colors were given rights of protection because of their capacity to control. And you see, ये सब तो पढ़ा है ना शेखर बंदोपाध्याय ने. This is why he declared that Brahman Vaidya caste of Kolkata, the Bhadraloks, are a caste in itself, because this is how castes operate. See, everything I'm saying is word for word applicable for Bhadraloks of today. Indeed, colors were given rights of protection because of their capacity to control and to a very large extent monopolize the means of violence. And there is much in Indian tradition to suggest that the opposition of bandit and king is a complementary opposition, but it is culturally speaking an opposition. What a brilliant paper, man. What a brilliant paper. Oh, colors were given rights of protection because of their capacity to control and to a very large extent monopolize the means of violence. And there is much in Indian tradition to suggest that the opposition of bandit and king is a complementary opposition, but it is culturally speaking an opposition, which is the violence of the bandit is illegitimate and it represents the causes. It represents and causes the disorder that the legitimate violence of the king must control. Kings are not only legitimate, they define the realm of the legitimate. So you see, this is why in a hypothetical situation, if BJP comes to power and 5 Muslims die, is hierarchically speaking worse off than Trinamool coming to power and killing 50 CPIM men, or CPIM coming to power and killing 50 Trinamool men. This is why, because one is legitimate as declared by Bhadraloks of Kolkata, one is illegitimate as declared by Bhadraloks of Kolkata. And the friend I was giving an example of, the presidency masters dropout, who was a lifelong CPIM supporter, who became a Trinamool supporter during 2020 and 2021 elections, is a Brahmin. And the way in which the royal subcaste organizes its social relations makes it impossible that they could be thieves or affected in any way by this general reputation. The royal subcaste is headed by a king, and it provides almost all the royal nobles of the kingdom. The fundamental duty of these members of the elite is to subdue disorder, destroy lawlessness, and enforce law and order, both within the kingdom at large and within the subcaste itself. And of course, as kings, by virtue of defining what is legitimate, they define disorder too. They define which political violence is unacceptable and illegitimate. They define that killing five people on the basis of religion is objectively worse off than killing 50 people because of their political party. They decide that killing five people because of their caste is way worse off than killing 50 people for their political party. See, हाँ, इस पेपर के बाद तो मेरा और भी कोई मतलब कोई डाउट ही नहीं है कि भद्रलोक is a caste and Bengal is a caste society. This is caste. This is casteism. This is exactly how Bengal operates. Just the names and terms are different. But this is true in more than just the obvious, or for that matter, the Foucaultian sense. आजकल तो Foucauldian बोलते हैं. Foucaultian sense, as I discovered when doing field work with other caste groups. For most castes, there is a steady decrease of order as one goes down the caste hierarchy, in the sense defined by my colored informants and assimilated with only minimal dissent by many non-colored informants. Marwars, for example, who in all fundamental respects were like colors, except for the crucial fact that they were not kings, had found it impossible to organize their social relations in the larger territorial units, the natus that colors had, and the Marwars lamented this loudly and frequently. तो यहाँ पे in this context, Marwars are kind of like the non-Brahmin Boiddo caste, तो upwardly mobile middle castes, okay, जिसका cultured capital last एक दो generation में हो गया है like the Bhadralok, but since it's not 50 generations back, therefore they can't get into those positions of power in Bengal. Indeed, the Marwars themselves attributed this disorder not just to the general decline and fall of the world in general, but more particularly to their loss of political control. For other groups, there was not only a noticeable decline in order and a laxness in defining and maintaining the Kattupattu, there was also a decline in the autonomy to define what order was. There was also a decline in the autonomy to define what order was. ये चेंज होने लगा. यही होगा जब बंगाल में भी ये कास्टिज्म टूट जाएगा, ये डिस्टर्ब हो जाएगा. तब डिस्ट्रप्शन क्या है भाई, उसका डेफिनेशन चेंज होगा एंड कौन डिफाइन करेगा, वो भोसड़ी का चेंज हो जाएगा. मेरे ख्याल से पूरी तरह से नहीं, क्योंकि Bengal's narrative can't be changed without the consent of Bhadraloks. Untouchable groups, for example, took the locality and sometimes the lineage names of their dominant. Oh my god. Untouchable groups, for example, took the locality and sometimes the lineage names of their dominant caste patrons, whereas other groups had traditional rights called Kaniyachi to land, honor, etc. Untouchables told me that for them, Kaniyachi only meant the right to serve their patrons. The fundamental structures of their social relations were inscribed by the hegemony of the dominant classes. Notions of honor, order, royalty, and command have been operationalized in the practices that produce and reproduce hierarchy. These practices, this reminds me of Pierre Bourdieu again. These practices, embedded as they are in cultural forms and historical processes, are themselves based on structures of power as well as on the hegemonic nature of cultural constructions of power, and hence the sort of the prerequisite of a caste to operate or a high caste to be high caste, the prerequisite being proximity to power. If it be argued that my interpretation, what a brilliant essay, man. If it be argued that this is one of the best sociological research papers I've read in my life. It's not like I've been reading papers all my life. It's about hardly 20 papers I've read in my life so far. This is one of the top 3. If it be argued that my interpretation, though perhaps true for marginal regions like Pudukkottai, can hardly apply generally to South India, let alone to the subcontinent as a whole, I replied that is precisely the marginality of Pudukkottai that makes it possible to detect the forces that were at work elsewhere. Because Pudukkottai was not brought under patrimonial control, neither that of the Islamic rulers in the south, nor later that of the British. Okay, because Pudukkottai was never under the influence of Islamic rule or British rule, therefore not brought under the patrimonial control of caste. Under patrimonial control, caste was never set completely loose from kingship. Okay, so in a way we can observe caste in how it was meant to be in places like Pudukkottai, because it has not gone through the distortions of Islamic rule or British rule. Many current theories of caste, particularly those emphasizing Brahmanic obsessions concerning purity and impurity. Okay, now he's going to troll someone. Many current theories of caste, particularly those emphasizing Brahmanic obsessions concerning purity and impurity, but also those aspects of ethnosociological theory that stress the proper and improper mixing of substances, are in large parts artifacts of colonialism. अरे भाई ये क्या हो रहा है, ये डालने दो मुझे. Which paper is this? Yeah, Buddhadev, the paper's name and the exact title and the author's name is exactly what's the name of the video. Okay. The original cast, colon, Power, History and Hierarchy in South Asia by Nicholas B. Dirks, the husband of हमारे Dr. Janki Bakle. M. Shastri, if you joined right now, do check it out from the very beginning. Okay, you have no idea what you missed here. This is one of the very best. Brilliant, brilliant. Let me take a break, bit of sip of coffee and check some comments here. Tatvik is saying, in India, there is no left wing socially. Here, there is right wing Hindu and right wing Islam. Most parties fall in those categories. No, left wing socially meaning, of course, cultural liberals. Bhadraloks would be left wing socialists, socially speaking, left wing. Even Abhijit Marit, Ayar Mitra, even me to some extent. Land and Society in Early South Asia, Eastern India, 400 to 1250 AD by Ryosuke Furui. Yeah, remember these books, okay? Oh, Shekhar's book is on the colonial period. Oh, okay. Great. Awas Yojana, yes. That we have seen in Rajanda's live streams and many others. I have read about things happened in the past, like Hitesh Ranjan Shanalia. That was fascinating. Of course, recommended by Mr. Sociologist only. We can't compare castes from old days to current Bhadraloks because the castes, to retain their privileges, still had to specialize and refine at least some skill that would be useful to the kingdom. Barbarika Smriti, you are not getting casteism at. You are not getting the concept of caste as of now. It's absolutely comparable today because Bhadraloks have a specific skill set called being academics or intellectuals, which helps in supporting this state. The state absolutely loves Bhadraloks. CPIM loved Bhadraloks, even though they, as a lip service, they criticize Bhadraloks for being bourgeoisie and stuff. They absolutely benefited from their work. Congress benefited from their work. Trinamool today benefits from their work, even though they were pretty, they used to give out a very anti-Bhadralok vibe because of Mamata Banerjee. So, right when someone comes to power, they remember that they need the Bhadraloks to survive. Who is the no vote to BJP gang today? Who is declaring those 5 Muslim deaths worse off than 50 CPM Trinamool deaths in political violence to be worse off? Who is declaring that the priority is preventing Hindu fascism over everything else, everything bad that happens in West Bengal? That is their skill set. So it's absolutely not different at all. Every elite kind of operates in the same manner, yes. Which is why, M. Shastri, I told you yesterday or day before yesterday that elite is a caste. This is why I treat Kushal as out and out leftist, because I don't have much disagreement with him on economics. I still don't understand the left and right in Indian context. Kushal tries to make Hinduism an individualist abstract philosophy where Astha is optional and atheists are equal partners to acharyas, even in leadership roles, like saying Richard Dawkins is a Hindu because he believes in love. And see, Ayush, you are of course almost. I have a little disagreement with you. You are not saying that explicitly, of course, but your tone might suggest that. That remember that Hinduism is not completely devoid of individualism either. Since Hinduism is not a religion, it's sort of a snapshot in time of a way of life in this country called Bharatvarsh. Therefore, you will find everything in that religion then, right? Therefore, you see, since a very advanced and well-educated, prosperous society will always fall on individualism for its intelligence and prosperity. Otherwise, we would be dumb fucks like other groups, right? Hence, there is a place for individuality. It was never at the cost of group, of course, but which is the biggest, let's say, biggest example of individuality inside Hinduism itself, religiously speaking? Ishtadevta. Why do you even need a concept of Ishtadevta? If you have if you already have a overall religion or a kul devta, gram devta, uske baad ishta devta kyun chahiye? Because your personality is also valued, respected, appreciated, cherished in Hindu society. So prioritizing one at the cost of the other is the problem. But don't eliminate individuality altogether, because then we become a stupid society. He's selling classical liberalism packaged as Hindu. This research paper is beyond brilliant. I agree. In India, there Tatvik. Okay, remember this point. This is this quote by Dirks, by the way. Yes, Mamta is anti-Bhadralok. Used to be. Depends on Bhadralok now. You need to start compiling a reading list for us. Are আর কতবার compile করবো? Bhadraloks are mostly right wing. Yeah, groups. Yes, groups, bro. I do be politically correct from time to time. This paper is also a great source to say and prove that there is no system to a caste system, as Satvik mentioned. Colors being both marginal caste and royal caste. Actually, I think the terms of Bhadralok and Buddhijeevi are being mixed up, don't you think? In common parlance, any middle class guy is termed as Bhadralok. No, their consumption pattern has to be that of a Bhadralok, because otherwise it does not. See, someone trying to be a Bhadralok is not a Bhadralok. Someone emulating a Brahmin is not a Brahmin. So someone a first generation, second generation person who now speaks in good polished Bengali, puts up good polished Bengali statuses on Facebook criticizing Bohiragata politics and stuff. That guy has not become Bhadralok, even though he might think he's a Bhadralok, even though the Bhadralok might say, yes, you are a Bhadralok as well. In the end, उससे काम नहीं होगा कुछ, उससे कोई काम करवाएगा भी नहीं, ठीक है? He just ends up being sort of the archetypal ugly best friend of a very, very hot and beautiful girl. Okay, every 90% of you'll see insanely beautiful, hot, gorgeous girls have one very, very ugly best friend. That's how those Bhadraloks work. The real Bhadraloks are in academia and the intellectuals. Even if their profession is not really academia, they might be an engineer journalist. Their batala will be fucking intellectual only. No, their way of thinking is intellectual. And it's not even actual intellect. They're not even using their critical thinking faculties. But more importantly, their consumption patterns. What have you read? What colleges did you go to? Okay, JU Pressy, if possible Harvard and stuff. So at the top of which there is a Nobel and Harvard or Cambridge. So the best way to designate a true Bhadralok from a fake Bhadralok is the consumption pattern. Okay, what do they eat? How do they eat? What do they watch? How do they watch? What do they read? How do they read? Okay, that's the important part that you get from Pierre Bourdieu. Barbarica Smriti says, oh my god, are you a woman? Holy shit. So yes, now no offense to anyone, but this is how it operates, because people are insecure. But this is exactly opposite of what happens between men. Attractive men who are good in sports and stuff, very fit, they become friends with only other men who are also attractive and good in sports and stuff. Ugly guys become friends with other ugly guys. Nerdy guys become friends with other nerdy guys. Spitting bars means a good rap, as a part of a good rap. Every secular party is all right. Okay, let's continue with the paper now. Many current theories of caste, particularly those emphasizing Brahmanic obsessions concerning purity and impurity, but also those aspects of ethno-sociological theory that stress the proper and improper mixing of substances, are in large parts artifacts of colonialism, referring to a situation in which the position of the king and the historical dynamic of royal power has been displaced and sometimes destroyed, basically disrupted. However much Dumont's theory is predicated on an a priori separation of what he describes as the domains of religious and politics, which the former encompassing the latter, meaning the religion encompassing politics, he was also almost certainly influenced by an ethnographic reality in which kingship played only a very small residual role, As for early ethno-sociological proposals about caste, Inden has himself recently noted that his early work is largely derived from texts which were generated only after the demise of kingship as a powerful cultural institution. The texts, he now says, reflected new traditions which attempted to deal with the problem of regulating caste introduction in an environment in which there was no longer a king. Disruption हो गया है. On Dumo, अच्छा, full trolling begin होगा अब. On Dumo, the politics of hierarchy. Tejas is saying that's true. I'm a nerdy guy. Yes, and my friends were always like that. My friends were always the ones who are bad in studies and interested only in listening to metal music and stuff. On Dumo, the politics of hierarchy. Politics, as we define it here, has both to do with the processes by which authority is constituted at each level of representation and with the linkages of the constituent groups in society to the king, proximity to power. So, as we define here, politics has both to do with the processes by which authority is constituted at each level of representation and with the linkages of the constituent groups in society to the king, usually through the authoritative figures who represent their social groups. Again, start comparing this with Bhadralux, okay, and we'll have fun. This will become more juicy. Politics has a territorial dimension but is not exhausted by territorial forms. In the royal subcaste of Kallars in Pudukkottai, the intervention of the king changed and reconstructed as well as decomposed the internal order of the system, affecting both social and territorial forms. Even in other subcastes less directly influenced by kingship, subcastes which were less directly influenced by kingship, social organization was only understandable within a framework which is fundamentally political, realized over time. It is my argument here that structures of power play a central role in the social organization of caste and kinship. Absolutely. That politics is fundamental to the process of hierarchization, which is why which is what I was saying, that today's caste politics is creating new status groups and incentivizing some castes over others. उससे ज्यादा कुछ नहीं हो रहा है. तो ये स्टेट से नहीं होना है. So it is my argument here that structures of power play a central role in the social organization of caste and kinship, that politics is fundamental to the process of hierarchization and the formation of units of identity. Brilliant. Dumo has great difficulty with the notion that kinship can be politicized. When he does see hierarchical tendencies develop in the domain of kinship, he blames them on the ideology of caste. Which has to do not with politics but with purity and pollution. मनुस्मृति मुखस्त करके आए थे सब डिसाइड करने, अच्छा ये प्योर है अकॉर्डिंग टू मनुस्मृति, टिक टिक, ये इम्प्योर है अकॉर्डिंग टू मनुस्मृति, चलो मूव ऑन. ऐसा चल रहा था अकॉर्डिंग टू डुमो. Dumo's elevation of alliance as the fundamental principle of South Indian kinship is in large part because alliance mitigates the asymmetrical effects of marriage relations through the generalized exchange of marriage partners within the endogamous group. Hierarchy creeps to the borders of the endogamous group, but only enters in the sense that it can bring about the creation of new endogamous subdivisions. Nonetheless, even though Dumo suggests the powerful role of political dominance in creating alliances and particular marriage patterns, he explains any such endogamous subdivisions by saying that they arise through bastardy or differential status of wives in a polygynous marriage. This means pratiloma, right? Endogamous groups develop with previous endogamous groups. Endogamous groups develop with previous endogamous groups only because of the lower status attached to marriages with women from outside the proper alliance group. Endogamous groups develop within previous endogamous groups only because of the lower status attached to marriages with women from outside the proper alliance group. If I had more time, I could compare this to Bhadralux as well, but I hope you all think hard and this will end up being that as well. Politics not only occupies a subordinate position in Dumo's general theory, but politics is eclipsed on the one side by the preeminence of kinship, invaded by social bastardy and caste hierarchy, and on the by caste, which elevates the Brahman and attendant principles of purity and pollution above the king. Caste and the hierarchical principle it entails is fundamental because it is religious, and in social thought, according to Dumo, the religious encompasses the social, the economic, and the political. Okay, and it's extremely dumb. Caste and the hierarchical principle it entails is fundamental because it is religious, according to Dumo, and in Indian social thought, the religious encompasses the social, the economic, and the political. If that was the case, when partition happened, Dalits would be uniformly voting for any one idea. Or today, even Motuas would not have three different kinds of views. Dumo therefore sees caste authority and political authority as fundamentally different, which is what the Indian mainstream idiots of caste discourse also view. He writes that, quote unquote, the notion of caste and of a superior caste exhausts all available transcendence. Properly speaking, a people's headman can only be someone of another caste. If the headman is one of their own, then to some degree they are all headmen. Oh my god. This is true in Pudukkottai in that headmen are at one level simply primus inter pares in their social group. However, by virtue of their connection to the king, they do transcend at some level their own community. Most importantly, the king himself is at one level simply a color and not the highest one at that. But by virtue of his kingship, not caste transcendence, he's not a caste heterodox, he's not moving beyond caste. Because of his kingship, he's also the transcendent overlord of the entire kingdom, even that if it's a little kingdom. Beautiful. Hierarchy in Pudukkottai concerns transcendence. Okay? Hierarchy in Pudukkottai concerns transcendence, meaning caste moving beyond caste. Concerns caste transcendence in the context of kingship, where the king is both a member of a segmentary lineage system and the overlord of the entire kingdom. What would seem contradictory to Dumo is the paradox upon which the entire caste system rests. Kinship is inflected at its core by politics. Not kingship even. Even kinship is inflected at its core by politics, and politics is nothing more than the curious paradox of a king who encompasses all, even as he is one of his own metonyms. नरेंद्र मोदी कौन है? एक फकीर आदमी है, हमारे से ही उठे, ग्राउंड लेवल कार्य करता है, मगर वह अब वो है प्राइम मिनिस्टर. In the social and political world of the little kingdom, this meant that the king was an overlord, but one who was nonetheless always embroiled in the strategic concerns of kinship, status hierarchy, protection and warfare, and in the maximization of his own honor and sovereign authority within the little kingdom and in a wider world of other kingdoms and greater overlords. Part of Dumo's resistance to acknowledging the political inflection of caste and kinship, okay, Dumo को क्यों पसंद नहीं था ये सब? Part of Dumo's resistance to acknowledging the political inflection of caste and kinship may result from the political marginality of the Pramalai Kallars, a marginality rendering them far more similar to the unruly Vichenkinattu Kallars who lived in the northwestern part of Pudukkottai state than to the royal subcaste. With both the Pramalai Kallars and the Vichenkinattu Kallars, the lack of well-developed affinal boundaries, okay, affinity, affinal boundaries, lack of well-developed affinal boundaries corresponding to discrete territorial units, as well as of a distinct sense of the hierarchy of groups, can perhaps be explained by their incomplete incorporation within the political system of a little kingdom, and therefore inflection by the political system of a little kingdom. Everywhere in Tamil Nadu, the Kallars had highly developed notions of territory, but subcaste organization achieved its particular level of territorial segmentation and hierarchical articulation in Pudukkottai alone. And only within the royal subcaste of Pudukkottai did Kallars develop the pronounced and complex forms of territorial bounding and hierarchical marking that they did, and which I describe in greater detail elsewhere in his previous year paper. Kingship, Raja, kingship does make a difference. Some of Dumo's theoretical problems stem from the fact that he does not pursue an interest in the ethno-historical reconstruction of the Pramalai Kallars. He is aware of the modern decline of headmanship and that it no longer expresses itself as fully as it might once have done in the social logic of Pramalai organization. Characteristically acute, he senses a correlation with recent political change. Okay. Dumo senses a correlation with recent political change and says, quote, if authority rests on external sanction, it is to be expected that it cannot maintain itself without formal government recognition, end quote. Unfortunately, he does not consider the possibility that colonialism and the attendant breakdown of the old regime have much to do with the development of the separation of religion and politics, which he has identified and reified into a timeless Indian social theory, and which is exactly what? The cosplaying fancy dress competition way of showing off your caste today in the so-called casteist states. which is what doesn't happen in West Bengal. Because here, politics and caste is still intertwined, but no one notices it because our terminologies are different. Okay, so you see, we are more pre-colonial. West Bengal is more pre-colonial in its application and operation of caste than actually the post-colonial fancy dress so-called casteist Indian states. A combination of theoretical program, ethnographic accident, and historical disinterest have conspired to render Dumo's understanding of the colors, however brilliant, limited in fundamental ways. Okay, so a combination of theoretical program, ethnographic quote-unquote accident, and historical disinterest have conspired to render Dumo's understanding of the colors, however brilliant, limited in fundamental ways. Here and elsewhere, I have argued that the social relations that made up Indian society, far from being quote-unquote essentialist structures, he's saying they were not essentialist at all, far from being essentialist structures predicated on the transcendence of a set of religious principles, in fact, they were permeated by political inflections, meanings, and imperatives. Political inflections, political meanings, and political imperatives. Caste, as it is still portrayed in much current anthropological literature, is a colonial construct. Oh my god. ये क्या हो रहा है आज के पेपर में? ये भी मुझे डालने दो कमेंट सेक्शन में. Caste, as it is still portrayed in much current anthropological literature, is a colonial construction reminiscent only in some ways of the social forms that preceded colonial intervention. अगर तुमको प्री कॉलोनियल कास्ट सिस्टम देखना है तो भाई आइदर ये 80s के पुडुक्कोट्टई में जाओ या फिर कोलकाता में आओ. The structural relations that made up the caste system in Pudukkottai thus reflect, albeit with the distortions of ethno-historical time, the ideological proposals of my informants. These ideological statements consistently referred to the historical means by and through which meaning was constructed and maintained. Yeah, meaning making is one of the main important aspects any historical sociologist or historical anthropologist must look at. Caste, if ever it had an original form, was inscribed from the very quote-unquote beginning by the relations and conceits of power. Oh my god, quote ke baad quote. Holy shit. ये भी डालने दो मुझे यहाँ पे. Dirks आज धोती खोल रहे हैं. And his anyway. And so caste, if ever it had an original form, okay, he is saying कि caste का वो एक original Edenist एक past था जहाँ पे वो perfectly work करता था, crystallized, not evolving in a way, okay, जब सब कुछ बढ़िया था या फिर सब कुछ और भी भोसड़ी वाला था. If at all there is a situation like that ever in history, it was inscribed from the very beginning by the relations and conceits of power, not divinity. Divinity was used as a sort of a PR exercise to justify the shenanigans of power and politics. And in medieval and early modern South India, it is clear that Geertz was indeed right. Power was what kings were. Ethnohistory and ethnosociology. Nietzsche says, okay, now Nietzsche, we need history, but not the way a spoiled loafer in the garden of knowledge needs it. Oh my god. What a brilliant. I mean, most quotes by Nietzsche are so fucking brilliant. Listen to this. Nietzsche is saying, we do need history, but not in the way a spoiled loafer in the garden of knowledge needs it. History का misuse करने के लिए नहीं. ये रहने दो वहां पे. हाँ. When I first began to use the term ethnohistory to describe the particular blend of history and anthropology that I sought to practice in my study of India, I thought that ethno should do the same thing to history that it seemed to be doing to sociology. Of course, the place was Chicago, the time the mid-70s, and the word was culture. But even then, and even despite the fact that in my work I sought to construct my sense of what it meant to do history in light of quote-unquote indigenous historical texts, ethnohistory struggled against itself. Ethnohistory struggled against itself. Not only did ethnohistorians seem constantly to pose the questions about epistemological mediations that began only rather later to deconstruct the original assumptions of ethnosociology. Questions such as how does an outsider attain access to or represent a culturally specific form of knowledge, etc. But culture as a domain was much more difficult to lock up or lock off as a separate area of inquiry. The injunction, which is that always historicize, seemed always already there. But then, as now, it was not always clear what the injunction meant. What would it really entail? What would it really mean to always historicize? Originally, ethnohistory meant the reconstruction of the history of an area and people who had no written history. As such, it was used to denote in particular the field of studies concerning the past of American Indians and, secondarily, of other so-called primitive or pre-literate societies. Primitive or pre-literate societies. But as many have since demonstrated, ethnohistory cannot be restricted to the unwritten or oral sources for history in most parts of the world where texts and written sources exist, even if they do not seem to penetrate some sectors of society. In India, as in many other places, there are no pure oral traditions. Texts have provided the basis for tradition as often as the other way around. Indeed, both texts and traditions relate not only to each other but also to historical processes of production and social forms of contextualization. Interpretation, okay? Brilliant sentence. Texts and traditions both relate not only to each other but also to historical processes of production and social forms of contextualization and interpretation and certification. Ethnohistory in India is clearly not about the history of primitive or pre-literate people. As suggested above, ethnohistory is also not simply a gloss for a cultural analysis of historical sensibilities in India, whether embodied in texts or traditions. However, a part of the task of ethnohistory is to contest the dominant voice of history, which in India has always been a Western voice. This voice has always disparaged India. Oh, fuck! ये क्या हो रहा है? This voice has always disparaged India, even though it agreed with commies and caste strats. This voice has always disparaged India, insisting that the relative absence of chronological political narrative and the unsettling presence of myth and fancy are indicative of an underdeveloped sense of history. Ethnohistory can therefore assist in the project of recuperating a multiplicity of historical voices, revealing for India an active, vital, and integral historiographical industry. I have also argued that ethnohistory can help determine a culturally specific set of relevancies, moments, and narrative forms to expand and alter the sense of how to think about India's past. अरे भाई इसको भी कोई कोई अच्छे पोजीशन में बिठाएगा नहीं इंडिया में. ठीक है, यूसीएलए का सैलरी कैसे देगा यहाँ पे? But this past, और जैफ्रेलो इंडिया में बैठा है. But this past is never contained solely within the texts of traditions that would be used for this task. If ethnohistory is used to situate history, it is always seen as itself situated in history. Yes. If ethnohistory is used to situate history, it is always seen as itself, meaning ethnohistory itself is situated in history, even though it's trying to situate history itself. Brilliant. So well said. And that is why it has failed. That is why it leads to just evil, stupid Orientalism. Ethnohistory is used to situate history, whereas it is itself situated in history. So it can't move beyond that. It can't transcend its own history. Thus, the difficulties in anthropologizing history are not simply removed by the inverse call to historicize anthropology, because we never seem to reach explicit agreement about what history actually means. But in this case, the problem and the solution are integrally interrelated. Because if an investigation into the culture of history has both the strengths and the weaknesses of ethnosociology, an exploration of what is involved in the history of culture can assist in making a creative critique of culture theory, whether in ethnosociology or elsewhere. Not only has ethnosociology been insufficiently clear about the epistemological privilege it assumes in its claim to represent indigenous forms of knowledge, it has completely excluded a wide range of historical questions, as also any consideration of the relations of knowledge and power beyond a narrow cultural domain. This is not the place, however, to summarize the arguments of Gramsci, Williams, Bakhtin, Bourdieu, Foucault, and other theorists who have helped specify and problematize the historicity of culture, it must suffice here to note that when culture is situated in history, okay, when culture is situated in history rather than opposed to history, the concept of culture inevitably opens up. I began by using by I began by using culture as a method and conceit to privilege the discursive meaning things that come out, okay, things that are prominent, overt. I began by using culture as a method and conceit to privilege the discursive claims of my colored informants in relation to Dumo's proposals about the nature of hierarchy in India. That is to say, I began by participating in the ethno-sociological claim that if you investigate native terms and meanings, you will find that hierarchy is about X and not about Y. However, the cultural statements of my informants subverted the autonomy of a presumed cultural domain, and in particular, the opposition between the political slash historical and the cultural slash religious. At the same time, the injunction to historicize, vague though it sometimes seemed, enticed me to enter the web of power, knowledge, and history that constituted both the world of reference as well as the necessary conditions for contemporary cultural discourse. Because, you see, it enticed Nicholas Dirks to enter the web of power, knowledge, and history that constituted both the world of reference as well as the necessary conditions for contemporary cultural discourse. Culture thus was a conceit that deconstructed itself through its own historical reference, because culture distilled and displayed and often displaced the historical legacy of its own hegemonic ascendance. Oh my god, what a beautiful sentence. Holy shit. What a beautiful way to put it. Culture was a conceit that deconstructed itself through its own historical reference, because culture distilled and displayed and often displaced the historical legacy. Culture, let's say, just focus on the word displaced for now because it gets more juicy in that way. Culture displayed as well as displaced the historical legacy of its own hegemonic ascendance. I need to put this up as a beautiful quote as well. Culture distilled and displaced the historical legacy of its own hegemonic ascendance. The necessarily ambivalent position of history within any ethno-historical project provides critical access to much of the current theoretical debate about culture. But ethnohistory should not simply disparage ethnosociology, because in calling attention to the hegemony of Western social science, ethnosociology both set some of the conditions for this kind of critique in Indian studies and may yet have the last laugh. The theoretical concerns about culture articulated above are as Western in their dominant figures, okay? The theoretical concerns about culture articulated above are as Western in their dominant figures and intellectual histories as the more positivist social science from which we tried to free ourselves in previous decades. Okay, let me just clarify the definition of positivism for a while. Positivism means a philosophical system recognizing only that which can be scientifically verified or which is capable of logical or mathematical proof, and therefore rejecting metaphysics or theism, the theory that laws and their operation derive validity from the fact of having been enacted by authority or of deriving logically from existing decisions rather than from any moral considerations. For example, the rule is unjust, etc. Fair enough. So, the theoretical concerns about culture articulated above are as Western in their dominant figures and intellectual histories as the more positivist social science from which we tried to free ourselves in previous decades. Exactly. Because what we discussed here was very positivist in that sense, because the way we learned the definition of positivism here, or we observed, we just checked. However, if history, quote unquote, history teaches us anything at all, it should at least help us dispose of the idea that culture can exist outside of history. However much this history, and I suspect any history, is always mediated through a multiplicity of cultural forms. This is the last sentence, I guess. Yeah, so let's read this beautiful sentence again for one last time. Maybe someday we'll have to reread this paper. However, if history, quote unquote, history teaches us anything at all, it should at least help us dispose of the idea that culture, history teaches us that culture cannot exist. History teaches us that culture cannot exist outside of history. However much this history or any history is always mediated through a multiplicity of cultural forms. Brilliant. History does teach us that uh, that culture can't exist outside of history, even though that history itself gets mediated through a multiplicity of cultural forms. Yeah, that is why Mahabharata is history. Is there some glitch in my StreamYard because I'm not getting any comments? How can it happen that for about the last half an hour there's no one commenting? This is the end of the paper, by the way, guys. What a brilliant paper. And if there are no comments anymore, I'll just go offline. Maybe no one is commenting really, and maybe I'm not seeing any comments. Oh, I'm here. Okay. So there were no comments. Okay, fair enough then. So what a great paper, guys. Let me finish the coffee and then I'll go offline. Maybe the cyclone will come or it will not come. If it doesn't come, there are two great events I'm going to go to tomorrow and day after tomorrow, both involving non-left intellectuals. Vinab's question. Now, Muslims in some context are already considered a separate caste. Even historically, they were considered a separate caste by Hindus as well. Are they so in today's sense of the word caste as we are talking about it? They probably are, but even there will be a distinction between ashrafs and pasmandas. So not they won't be a complete monolith. This was published in 1989. Yeah, written in 88. And still relevant in today's Kolkata. It will not come. What will not come? Mystery of sociologists did say that Dumo has been called as, yeah, but only inside academia. Outside academia, the common discourse, people who do just graduation, masters and stuff, even in elite institutions, they are in the exactly the Dumontian view only. Yeah, brilliant paper. Awesome paper. Okay, then let's not elongate this video any longer because a lot of people watch videos based on how long it is. So let's go off as quickly as possible. Thank you for joining the live stream, guys. Tomorrow and after tomorrow, if there is a cyclone, I'm not coming online anyway because there will be a power cut. And if there is no cyclone, I'm going to 2 events. So tomorrow I won't. Tomorrow and after tomorrow, I'm not going to be coming online. Yes, I'm Shastri. This is actually exactly what I said a while before you came online. Okay, that even Sangh believes in everything Dumontian. Okay then, guys. Thank you for joining the live stream. Thanks a lot for staying on this long for a pretty advanced, complex paper. Good night, guys. Bye-bye.
श्रवरूढं महाभीमं गुणाद्रंष्टाम्बरप्रदम् अस्य युक्तं त्रिनेत्रं च कपालकर्णिकाकरान् मुक्तकेशीं ललज्जयं पिबन्तीं रुधिरं चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् काली काली महाकाली कालिके पापहारिणी धर्मर्थमोक्षदे देवी नारायणी नमोस्तुते धर्मर्थमोक्षदे देवी नारायणी नमोस्तुते काली काली